You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Fundamentally, the IT systems are moving to a zero-trust architecture.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, the Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host, Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
Today, Ben looks at content moderation in the EU. I've got the story of the White House limiting the DoD's offensive cyber operations. And later in the show, my conversation with Lauren Van Wazer from Akamai. We're going to be talking about the implications of the Biden administration's executive order on cybersecurity. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud, the cybercrime analytics leader. SpyCloud disrupts cybercrime by telling you what criminals know about your business and your customers, so you can take action to prevent ransomware, session hijacking, account takeover, and online fraud. SpyCloud constantly recaptures and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, including credentials, session cookies, and PII siphoned from malware-infected devices. With knowledge of the specific exposed data criminals have in hand from InfoStealer malware on managed and unmanaged devices, security teams can respond with a more efficient and effective process called post-infection remediation that fits seamlessly into existing incident response frameworks. Get SpyCloud's post-infection remediation guide outlining the 7 steps for preventing a malware infection from becoming a full-blown ransomware incident. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. All right, Ben, we've got some good stories to share this week. Why don't you start things off for us here?
So mine comes from Ryan Brown over at CNBC, and it's entitled, EU Agrees on Landmark Law Aimed at Forcing Big Tech Firms to Tackle Illegal Content. And this is about a new digital regulation that was agreed to by officials in the European Union over this past weekend. And it would force our favorite tech giants, Google, Meta, Twitter, and others, to better police illegal content on their platforms, or else risk multi-billion-dollar fines. It's something like 6% of their annual revenue, which is, pretty significant.
The Europeans really like to come at things with percentage of revenue fines, don't they? I mean,
yes,
that was baked
sure
into
do.
GDPR.
There are a lot of interesting parallels with GDPR here that I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
I see this as sort of the ugly cousin of GDPR.
Okay.
And I think the way it's going to carry out in the United States might be a little distinct than what we saw with GDPR, but there are a lot of similarities.
Okay.
So first, what does this new regulation do? This would limit how digital giants target users with online advertisements. So the regulations would stop platforms from targeting users with algorithm using data based on things like gender, race, religion, immutable characteristics. You won't be able to target children with targeted advertising. It would ban dark patterns, so any tactics designed to push people towards services and products that are not on the up and up are going to be banned as part of this regulation. And then, perhaps most controversially, tech companies are going to be required to institute procedures to take down illegal material, including things like hate speech, incitement to terrorism, and child sexual abuse. I think that is going to be the most difficult thing for U.S. authorities and U.S. companies to grapple with. What we saw with GDPR is the EU put in these regulations, and the tech companies decided, if we're going to have to go through hoops to comply with these regulations for our European user base, we might as well just institute these as general practices. So back in 2018, 2019, we all got emails saying our terms of service have changed to comply with GDPR.
Right.
I probably got hundreds of those emails. I think it was easier for the tech companies to just say, let's comply with these regulations and not have two separate regulatory regimes in the United States and in the European Union.
Right.
When we're talking about things like censoring illegal material, things like hate speech and incitement to terrorism, I think our values in the United States and our legal system makes it a little more difficult to apply that provision within the United States. I think we have more of a culture that prizes the marketplace of ideas, controversial opinions, and categorizing certain things as hate speech might be more offensive to the U.S. user base than it would be to our European counterparts. And so this might be something where if we were to just adopt these new digital service regulations in the United States, there might be an uproar that these terms are censoring too much, particularly political content. And I think it's really interesting that this regulation was agreed to the same general period that Elon Musk purchased Twitter.
Okay.
I know. I'm going to get there. I'm drawing the connection.
I'm waiting for you to connect those dots. But
So his big objection to Twitter, seemingly, and I frankly don't exactly understand why he's purchasing it and what his goals are.
Right.
But he's talked about wanting to foster a platform that is absolutist in its stance on free speech. And he is, I think, against excessive content moderation, particularly things like shadow banning people based on their political ideology.
Okay.
And I think that kind of goes against the spirit of what this Digital Services Act in the European Union would be doing to entities like Twitter, where they would actually be moderating more content. So I think we're going to see this clash of values. This regulation, and I think particularly people on the left side of the political spectrum in the United States think that there's too much hate speech, too much incitement to terrorism, that big social media platforms played a large role, for example, in the January 6th events, and that we need stricter content moderation to make these platforms more tolerable, to keep everybody safe. The other side of the ledger, represented by people like Elon Musk, is that we need to have reasonable content moderation that fosters the greatest exchange of ideas, that fosters the greatest extent of free speech as humanly possible. I'm not sure if the Elon Musk vision is achievable in practice. What's going to happen is if you don't do enough content moderation, your site is going to be overrun with bots and neo-Nazis and other undesirable people.
Right. I mean, that's the way it's played out. We've been through this before, right? I mean, So is this a fool's errand to think? Is it just rhetoric to say I'm coming in and I'm going to be the one who supports free speech? Because it seems like every time that happens, folks come in and they say that, and then the reality sets in, and they're like, well, actually, you know what? This isn't going to be a viable commercial entity if we just let everybody out here with their megaphones shout at each other.
Right. So this is what I wonder about the whole Elon Musk thing.
Yeah.
Is he doing this because he thinks he can make Twitter profitable, and he thinks that there would be a better business model in being more open to different types of speech, including some speech that would have been curtailed under the previous Twitter regime?
Okay.
Or is he doing this as some sort of ideological play where he's actually willing to lose money but believes so strongly in the idea of an unregulated platform, or a platform where content moderation is extremely minimal and is limited to direct threats of violence, things like that. And I think there are certain actions he could take, one of them being letting President Trump back on Twitter, and then a couple of the other famous, notorious accounts that have been permanently banned on Twitter, letting those back. It would be a signal that he's really doing this for ideological purposes, even if it would not be a viable business model. And unlike the other 7 billion people in the world, it might not be that big of a deal to him to lose billions of dollars if this is an ideological project that he cares about. So I just thought,
and in the meantime, ruins Twitter for the rest of us.
well, that's certainly my worry. I mean,
although I suppose some people could say finally allows Twitter to realize its great potential, right?
And that seems to be the view of even people like Jack Dorsey, who tweeted yesterday, as we're recording this, we're going to let Twitter flourish. Twitter is going to take off to the stars. It's going to be this free speech platform. We are absolutists in our position on free speech. I think what we see in this European Union law is the countervailing force is unfettered free speech leads to hate speech, incitements to violence, and various forms of deranged, psychotic, pornographic material.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're starting kind of it's not yet a hot war. It's more like a cold war of opposing sides on the content moderation divide between the Elon Musks of the world who think that we're moderating content too much and entities like the European Union who has really taken the lead in fighting big tech companies in trying to prevent these services from being detrimental to society writ large. So I just thought that was a really interesting juxtaposition and that it happened kind of around the same time.
Yeah. I think another aspect of this that fascinates me just with the whole Elon Musk buying Twitter thing is just that we're at this place where we have this billionaire class who can buy things up this way. And
as a vanity project.
Right. And so you look at Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post and you have Elon Musk buying Twitter. So you have this small number of people who have a large amount of control over many of the primary ways in which information is distributed today. It's not like it used to be. Owning a newspaper is not, you can't compare owning a newspaper to owning Facebook or Twitter, or it's a different it's another level of magnitude of reach, I suppose. Is a good way to say.
Now, in fairness, it's not like Twitter was a company, was like a co-op that you'd see in Park Slope in Brooklyn, owned by its users. I mean, it was a publicly traded company, but it still had a top-down structure, and some of the major investors were eccentric billionaires. Certainly somebody like Mark Zuckerberg controlling Facebook is another example of a billionaire with a lot of decision-making power. I think what some of the Elon Musk boosters are saying now that he's bought Twitter is, we're just transferring control from a billionaire class that doesn't believe in free speech to a billionaire class that does believe in free speech. So the constant is having an eccentric billionaire at the head of the company. Now we have someone that's supportive of free speech. The broader thing that I think you're bringing up is it good at all to have billionaires be in control of the main arteries of communication? People
globally.
Right.
Yeah.
People who might, frankly, have their own parochial interests. And that's true at any side of the ideological spectrum, whether it's Bezos at the Washington Post, promoting his own business interests in Amazon and Whole Foods, or if it's Elon Musk and his ideology maybe making its way into some of the content moderation decisions he and his people are going to make at Twitter. I don't think that's particularly healthy. I don't know what the solution is. So the thought is maybe we do what Justice Thomas has argued in a recent Supreme Court dissent, that we start to look at these entities like common carriers and we allow for increased federal regulation on these sort of content moderation practices. That itself is extremely problematic in a number of ways. So I think
that pesky First Amendment. Right?
I know. Really, we're at a position where I'm not sure this is exactly the right term, but these companies are too big to fail. We need to make them as successful as possible.
Too big to fail, or too big to be the playthings of individuals.
Right. Too big to be vanity projects of people who think that they have a brilliant idea of how to reinvent the wheel. I guess the question is this going to be like Tesla, or is this going to be like one of those weird Hyperloop tunnel projects that's gone nowhere? And I guess that remains to be seen.
With their spaceships, right?
Right.
I mean, let's go into low Earth orbit together. Yay, wee!
Yeah.
I suppose. Look, wealthy people can spend their wealth on whatever they want.
Apparently, yeah.
But I guess it gives me pause when you see public policy enable this amount of accumulation of wealth. I have a problem with that. I have no problem with rich people. But when it gets to this point, I think perhaps we've got a public policy failure here. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yeah,
I know that's not necessarily a popular opinion, but I submit it's bearing out that it can be problematic.
Let me just state for the record to our new Twitter overlords, I don't agree with Dave Bittner. Do not kick me off your platform.
I see.
I love our eccentric billionaires.
This is how it's going to go. This is how it's going to play out, huh, Ben?
I think so.
Twitter's more important to you than me. I understand. I know where I stand now.
If you happen to see me complimenting SpaceX,
it's fine
on my Twitter profile, then you might have an idea of what I'm up to.
All right. Fair enough. All right, we'll have a link to that story in the show notes. My story this week, this comes from the Wall Street Journal. It's actually an opinion piece written by Jacqueline Schneider. She is a fellow at the Hoover Institution. And this is, it's titled, The Biden White House's Cyberwarfare Power Grab. And it's interesting to me from a couple of perspectives. So first, let me unpack what the case that she's making here is that back during the Obama administration, President Obama had a policy directive which kind of centralized the interagency review process for offensive cyber operations. Okay, so offensive cyber operations are when our Department of Defense, our intelligence community, rather than being reactive, they are proactive, and they go and do things in the cyber realm that they are to our national defense or strategic interests, and they go out and do them. Evidently, during the Obama administration, the systems that they put in place were, by some accounts, took a lot of effort to get things through, right? Interagency review processes.
Bureaucratic squabbles.
Yes, all of that kind of stuff. So when President Trump took the reins, evidently he streamlined this. And he had National Security Presidential Memorandum 13, which, according to this piece, is classified. But public statements say that it allowed the folks in the Department of Defense to conduct what they call time-sensitive offensive cyber operations by sidestepping this interagency approval process. Right. So if they needed to, they could go and do the things they needed to do without having to go through all of this rigmarole. Now with President Biden in office, evidently he is looking to roll back to the way things were during the Obama administration, slowing things down again. I'm curious what your take on this is, Ben, because on the one hand, I have to wonder, to what degree is this just sort of partisan stuff where Obama had one way of doing things, Trump came in and changed it, Biden's going to change it back to the way that Obama had it just because he can, or is there actually a legitimate policy reason that the Biden administration could see to slow this down? Could they perhaps the things that they know that we don't know, because a lot of the stuff is classified, is it possible that they've looked at this and said, yeah, you know what, perhaps things were happening a little too fast?
I think this is more of an ideological difference of views than a partisan one. I think generally Democratic administrations, and this isn't just true as it relates to defense policy, wants more layers of interagency oversight over everything. So there's going to be a more centralized bureaucratic review of all federal regulations, for example. In Republican administrations, particularly as it relates to the Department of Defense and military operations, you don't want all of these additional bureaucratic hurdles, and you want to give more authority to people to take action when necessary. I mean, this is kind of George W. Bush war on terror mentality. We don't want to hamstrung our defense apparatus, our generals who are on the ground to understand these operations. We don't want them to be hamstrung by a burdensome review process. I'm not sure that either side in this dispute is necessarily right or wrong. I think it's just a different approach to cyber operations. What this author is saying, the author of this op-ed, is the Trump policy gives the Pentagon free rein to conduct whatever cyber operations it deems useful, and that's problematic. But what she's saying is, in the time that regulation has been in place, there's not that much evidence that the U.S. is engaging in all kinds of offensive cyber operations. It's not the case that the Defense Department is acting brashly or out of turn in getting us wrapped up in cyber conflict. And in fact, that's just not how cyber conflict has played out over the past several years. It hasn't been used as an offensive weapon in a way that would cause more kinetic military activity. It's been used
it hasn't led to escalation.
Right. It's been used for things like surveillance, espionage, creating a general fog, social media trolling, hacktivism. And I think for that reason, this author might say we don't need to be as worried about the Pentagon taking these actions without any oversight. What I might say is, because this is not necessarily a purely Defense Department operation, this isn't something that's wholly a military operation, maybe we do want review from other agencies that have different expertise. So whether that's an entity like CISA, whether that's the State Department, who understands how these things work diplomatically, or just people who have technical expertise. I mean, it might be useful as long as this is not solely a military operation. If we're doing things for the purpose of espionage, for the purpose of intelligence gathering, maybe it's better that other entities besides the Department of Defense get involved. But that's just my view.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting point. I mean, as you say, Ms. Schneider, who wrote this piece, points out that cyberspace isn't necessarily the Wild West anymore, that we're seem to be settling into this mode where there are norms that are being developed. And I think a lot of the fears that people had, look at the invasion of Ukraine. We thought that perhaps the lights would be turned off, or we wouldn't be able to pump our gas, or all sorts of critical infrastructure things might happen. And they haven't. It hasn't played out that way. Doesn't mean it couldn't in the future.
Right.
But so far, this is where we seem to be. So, yeah, interesting. I think it's a good point she makes here. It is kind of wonky, I guess. It's a sort of a subtle thing. The back and forth between administrations kinds of I guess that part fascinates me. You did this and I did this, and we're going to do this. And
trust me, this is not even close to the most extreme example of how these things work. Yeah. I mean, my favorite example is the House of Representatives cafeteria.
Go on.
This is going to sound fascinating, but in 2007, the Democrats took control of Congress. Speaker Pelosi came in and had this whole Green the Capitol initiative.
Okay.
So all of the dishware in the House cafeteria was biodegradable. It was environmentally friendly. Then Republicans took over the House in 2011, and styrofoam came back.
Oh, interesting.
We got styrofoam day one.
Right.
2019, Speaker Pelosi comes back into power, and the biodegradable cups made their return to the House cafeterias.
Right.
So
right.
It can get a lot more petty than defense policies. I mean, even something like the Mexico City policy, which is whether we provide foreign aid to organizations that promote abortions overseas, that's something that when every new administration comes in, on the first day, they reverse the previous administration's policy if they disagreed with it.
Right.
So Republican administrations come in and reinstitute the Mexico City policy. Democratic administrations come in and they rescind it.
Right.
So this is just part of the back and forth of politics.
Yeah.
There's no point in gaining power if you're not going to put your ideological stamp on everything you do.
Yeah.
Whether that's cyber espionage or the house cafeteria dishware?
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of when President Reagan came in and tore the solar panels off the White House.
Solar panels are gone.
Right. So the house cafeteria, soon you'll be able to order yourself a baby seal burger, right?
Right. If the Republicans win this fall, styrofoam's coming back.
Right.
And we'll just put those biodegradable cups on the shelf until the next time the Democrats take power.
Yes, petty differences at the highest level, right? All right, well, that is my story this week. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. Again, that's from the Wall Street Journal, written by Jacqueline G. Schneider. Now, a word from our sponsor, the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute, currently seeking qualified applicants for its innovative Master of Science in Security Informatics degree program. Study alongside world-class interdisciplinary experts and gain unparalleled educational, research, and professional experience in information security and assurance. Interested U.S. citizens should consider the National Science Foundation's CyberCore Scholarship for Service program, which covers tuition and a $6,000 annual professional development allowance, as well as providing a $37,000 additional annual stipend. Apply for the scholarship and the fall semester by March 1st. Learn more at cs.jhu.edu/MSSI. All right, Ben, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Lauren Van Wazer. She is from Akamai, and we were talking about some of the implications of the Biden administration's executive order on cybersecurity. Here's my conversation with Lauren Van Wazer.
Yes, so the government has worked through what their strategy is, what to define it. I mean, frankly, everyone selling products wants to call their products zero trust now. Everybody, it's it's the new popular moniker. Basically, in the context of the federal government, zero trust really is nothing different than it is, accepted in the security community. I mean, basically, limiting access through better authentication. There are going to be a variety of tools that the government uses to do that, including multi-factor authentication, which is also talked about in the cybersecurity executive order. But I guess I would say what's striking about this order in the zero trust area, and I'd love to talk about some of the other areas because it covers the waterfront, is that the Biden administration is really leading by example here. Federal agencies aren't known for their alacrity and adhering to new IT standards. And, in some sense, the Biden administration has put the marker down and said, you will get here. And there's a set of timelines for that. And it's kicked off this multi-agency process, the complete alphabet soup of the federal government to look at this set of issues. And I think it's important, just stepping back on the zero trust issue, is that the government's leading by example, not only to the private sector, but also to other governments around the world. The Biden administration is really at the forefront here in moving to a zero trust environment, which is really where we need to be to get government systems more secure. And so it will encourage and incentivize other governments around the world to take the same approach. So zero trust is just one area of the order, but even the zero trust aspects are very significant in terms of the ultimate implications for the industry.
Yeah, it's really striking how broad it is, and as you say, the number of agencies that this is going to affect. Do you have insights onto how heavy a lift this is going to be for various agencies? I mean, is it, and to what degree are some agencies, farther along the path than others?
Well, as with anything, in moving an entity, I mean, the federal government's the largest purchaser of IT services, right? So it's like moving a behemoth in a new direction. There are definitely agencies that are faster forward on that transition. As you'd expect, some of the defense related agencies, and then there are agencies that may not be as advanced. But the key is that the Biden administration, the president himself, because it's a presidential executive order, has signaled that this is going to be a priority for the administration, and agencies need to get there and need to get there on a tight timetable. The one thing that sort of goes part and parcel with all of this is a presidential executive order does not change the budgets of the individual agencies. And so for some of them, it's a rejiggering, a juggling, changing, if you will, of their priorities on IT spend, but it doesn't give them a different bottom line. So there'll likely be different appropriations requests as we move along in this process.
And what sort of timeline are we on here?
Executive order laid out very specific timetables. Some of the interim deliverables are not public, and so on some things can't easily verify, but I would expect most of the work associated with the executive order to be done in the next 2 to 3 years. Not surprisingly, that is the term of the president, but NIST, OMB have already provided some interim outputs. OMB released recently a zero trust strategy for federal agencies. NIST talked about released a risk-based approach for software development, some interim standards associated with that. So all of the agencies have kicked into gear and are working together to move this process along.
Yeah. You mentioned that this goes beyond just zero trust. What are some of the elements here that have caught your eye?
A host of things. One is working toward uniform incident response for the federal government, standardizing how the playbook for how agencies respond to cyber incidents, something that hasn't been done before. Also, there was the creation of a National Cyber Safety Review Board. You think about the National Transportation Safety Board, but for cyber incidents. The membership of that was recently announced in January. Their first item on their agenda that they're going to be looking at is Log4j. There has been nothing like the NTSB in the cybersecurity area. So that's really significant development, and that board is comprised of both government and private sector entities. So it includes representation from DHS, DoD, DOJ, but also private sector entities like Verizon and Google are on it. So I think that'll be a really interesting area to watch and see the efficacy of that board and see what they generate in terms of their reports on some of these incidents. They also will have the ability to make policy recommendations.
What is your sense of the response has been from the organizations that this is going to affect? Are they embracing this? Do they find that this is a realistic ask from the executive branch?
I think it's important to look at the kind of two buckets of folks impacted by this. There's obviously, and we've talked about it, the federal agencies, but the executive order applies directly to federal IT contractors. And so if you provide services to the federal government, you need to take note to some of the requirements that will be an outgrowth of the executive order. But I think one of the things that's really important to note, and I'm sure the folks in your audience who are federal IT contractors or have focused with just intense interest on this executive order and looking at their product suites that might map to it and things like that. But I think it's important to stand back and see, even if you are not a federal IT contractor, the likelihood is very significant that the outgrowth of the policymaking activities associated with this executive order will impact your business. There will definitely be spillover in the commercial space. So if I had to say a PSA here, a public service announcement, it's if somehow you thought, geez, you didn't have to focus on this order because you're not a federal IT contractor, think again. This will have extraordinary ripple effects in the commercial arena, and don't bypass any opportunity to weigh in or monitor what's happening, because ultimately it will impact your business.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. I mean, do you suppose we could find that? I'm thinking everything from contracting requirements to insurance companies, saying, are you compliant with this newly established federal standard?
Absolutely. And, to add to that, I would say expect that to be the case globally. So I worked in the White House for the 2013 presidential cybersecurity executive order, the one that set baseline requirements for cybersecurity across all industries and kicked off the process to develop the NIST framework, cybersecurity framework. That framework from the US presidential executive order has been adopted wholesale in many countries around the world. So, even if you're a company operating outside the United States, odds are this executive order process and the outgrowth of it will ultimately affect your business if you're in this area.
Cybersecurity, I think, is one of the rare things that enjoys bipartisan support. Is this the kind of thing that you see outlasting the current administration? That a different administration, should they have different political goals, would tend to leave something like this in place?
Yes, I mean, maybe change some things around the edges, but fundamentally, the IT systems are moving to a zero trust architecture. So while that transition is happening, this executive order is a catalyst, maybe to make it happen sooner for the federal agencies than otherwise, make it a higher priority. But that is inevitable because that's the way to safeguard federal IT systems for the future. So I would expect work along these lines to continue. You might have the variations on the theme would be things like maybe different membership in the Cyber Safety Review Board, things like that. But I wouldn't expect there to be wholesale changes in direction.
All right, Ben, what do you think?
First of all, we need to crown the Dave Bittner proposal in the Cybersecurity Executive Order for the NTSB Cyber Incident Review. That's something that you've been pushing for years. The fact that she's mentioned it just really jumped off the page to me. I think you need to get more credit here.
Okay, yes. I've quietly pulling the levers and turning the dials, right?
Yeah, you really control the strings on cyber policy, so
yes.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
It's a really interesting interview. I mean, I think earlier in this episode, we talked about how the EU has taken the lead on things like data privacy, regulating content on social media, but the US has really taken a lead on some of the things that are embedded in the cybersecurity executive order, governance issues, reporting requirements. So it's kind of good to see that we're taking the lead in one realm here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, our thanks to Lauren Van Wazer for joining us. We do appreciate her taking the time.
This episode is brought to you by Palo Alto Networks, the leader in cybersecurity, As AI-driven attacks increase, organizations can't afford to have network security that's stuck in the past. Discover how Palo Alto Networks can help you predict what's coming and proactively secure against it with a zero-trust, AI-powered network security platform built to secure whatever, whenever, wherever. To learn more, visit paloaltonetworks.com/network security platform.
And that is our show. We want to thank all of you for listening. The Caveat podcast is proudly produced in Maryland at the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our senior producer is Jennifer Iben. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.